My name is Eleanor Thompson, and at 67, I never thought I would lie to my own son about money. Douglas had grown distant since his career took off, so when my friend suggested testing his love by claiming my pension was only a third of the actual amount, I reluctantly agreed. I had no idea that my small deception would unravel into something that would change our relationship forever. The way he responded to my financial crisis left me speechless. Before I share what happened, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And please hit that like and subscribe button to support more stories about family bonds that surprise us in the most unexpected ways. I was born in Maple Creek, Michigan, a town so small that most maps don't even bother to include it. My childhood home sat between a general store and the local library, which is probably where my love for books and learning first took root. I spent most of my afternoons lost in stories while other kids played outside. My mother always said I was born to teach, and as it turned out, she was right. After high school, I did something that shocked everyone in Maple Creek. I packed my bags and moved to Chicago to attend college. It was 1974, and the city seemed impossibly large and intimidating to a small-town girl like me. The university campus became my sanctuary, and education my calling. I graduated with honors and immediately secured a position at Westridge Elementary School. That first classroom of mine, with its squeaky floor and windows that refused to open in summer, became my home for the next 40 years. I taught third grade almost exclusively, finding something magical about children at that age, when they're just discovering their own capabilities, but still look at teachers with wide-eyed wonder. Over 4 decades, I watched fashions change, teaching methods evolve, and technology transform education, but children, at their core, remained wonderfully consistent. It was at a teachers' conference in 1980 that I met Frank Thompson. He was tall with kind eyes and a gentle laugh that immediately drew me in. Frank taught high school physics in a neighboring district, and we bonded over shared stories of classroom mishaps and difficult parents. Our courtship was swift and uncomplicated. We married the following year in a simple ceremony attended by colleagues and a few family members. Frank and I tried for years to have children. We underwent treatments, consulted specialists, and eventually resigned ourselves to a childless life together. We found fulfillment in our careers and in mentoring young people. Then when I was 42 and had all but abandoned hope, the miracle happened. I became pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult, and doctors warned of risks due to my age, but 9 months later, Douglas Frank Thompson came into the world, healthy and perfect. Raising Douglas while maintaining our teaching careers wasn't easy. Frank and I tag-teamed parenting duties, frequently grading papers after Douglas finally fell asleep. We were older parents among his friends' families, often mistaken for grandparents at school functions, but we poured every ounce of love and energy into raising him. Douglas was a bright, curious child who inherited his father's analytical mind and, I like to think, my compassion. He excelled academically and showed an early aptitude for mathematics. Unlike me at his age, he was outgoing and popular, always surrounded by friends. I remember watching him in the schoolyard, organizing games and resolving conflicts, already showing leadership qualities that would serve him well later in life. Frank retired when Douglas started college, but I continued teaching, partly because we needed the income for Douglas's education and partly because I couldn't imagine life without my classroom. Frank filled his retirement days with volunteer work at the Science Museum and puttering around our modest suburban home. We weren't wealthy by any standard, but we had enough for a comfortable life. When Douglas graduated with a business degree, he immediately landed a position at a prestigious financial firm. His career advancement was meteoric. Within a decade, he had become a senior financial advisor with an impressive client portfolio. He married Rebecca, a pediatric nurse with a warm smile and practical nature. They gave us 2 beautiful grandchildren, Lily and James, who unfortunately lived too far away for regular visits. Frank never got to enjoy his golden years fully. 5 years ago, a sudden heart attack took him from us. I found myself alone in our home, surrounded by memories and half-finished projects he would never complete. Douglas flew in for the funeral and helped with arrangements, but returned to his busy life shortly after. I understood he had responsibilities, but his absence left a void that nothing could fill. I continued teaching for another 3 years after Frank's passing, But eventually, fatigue and changing educational requirements convinced me it was time to retire. 2 years ago, I said goodbye to my final class, cleared out my desk, and stepped into retirement with mixed emotions. Adjusting to life without the daily structure of school was challenging. Suddenly, I had endless hours to fill and the silence of an empty house to contend with. I established routines: morning walks, weekly bridge games with other retired teachers, and volunteer work at the very library that had nurtured my love of reading as a child. My pension, combined with Frank's savings and Social Security, provided enough for me to maintain our home and live comfortably, if not luxuriously. I had to budget carefully, but I wasn't concerned about making ends meet until last winter, when I slipped on ice and fractured my hip. The medical bills, even after insurance, were substantial, and I found myself dipping into savings more than I was comfortable with. During my recovery, I noticed how infrequently Douglas called. Our conversations, when they did occur, felt superficial. He would ask about my health in a perfunctory way before steering the conversation toward his achievements or the children's activities. When I mentioned financial concerns, he seemed dismissive, suggesting I just pull from investments, as though I had a portfolio comparable to his. It was during one of my bridge games that my friend Mildred made the suggestion that would change everything. Mildred had raised 3 sons and had strong opinions about modern parenting and adult children's responsibilities toward aging parents. "You know what you should do," she said, arranging her cards with deliberate precision. "Test him. Tell him your pension is less than it is and see how he reacts." "That's ridiculous," I responded, though the idea lodged itself in my mind. "Is it? You've supported him his entire life. Don't you deserve to know if he'd do the same for you?" Mildred pressed. The other ladies at the table murmured in agreement, sharing stories of children who either stepped up or disappointed when parents needed them. I dismissed the conversation, but the seed had been planted. A week later, when Douglas called for his monthly check-in, I found myself contemplating Mildred's suggestion more seriously. What would he do if he thought I was struggling? Would he offer help, or would he remain absorbed in his own affluent world? The question nagged at me, and against my better judgment, I began to formulate a plan that would soon take on a life of its own. The decision to test Douglas didn't come easily. I spent several nights staring at my bedroom ceiling, remembering the little boy who once made me Mother's Day cards with careful handwriting and uneven heart cutouts. The same child who, when he was 8, insisted on spending his allowance to buy soup when I had a cold. Had success truly changed him so fundamentally? I remembered the summer Douglas was 12, when he organized a neighborhood car wash to raise money for new books for my classroom after budget cuts. He worked tirelessly in the hot sun, directing his friends with natural authority, counting money with meticulous attention. That evening, sunburned but proud, he presented me with $342 in a shoebox decorated with marker drawings of books. Then there was his high school graduation, when he thanked Frank and me in his valedictorian speech, crediting his success to our support and sacrifices. The entire audience turned to look at us, and Frank squeezed my hand so tightly it almost hurt. Our boy, our miracle, had grown into a young man who understood gratitude and acknowledged those who helped him along the way. Had that thoughtful boy truly disappeared into the busy, somewhat detached man who now called me out of obligation? Or was he still there, beneath the designer suits and carefully maintained professional demeanor? I needed to know, though the means of finding out felt increasingly uncomfortable. The opportunity presented itself 3 weeks after my conversation with Mildred. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening while I was preparing a simple dinner of soup and toast. "Hi, Mom." Douglas's voice sounded slightly harried, with the ambient noise of what I assumed was his car's Bluetooth system. "Douglas, what a nice surprise," I said, though his calls around this time of month had become routine enough to set a clock by. "Just checking in. On my way home from a client meeting. How are you feeling? Hip still giving you trouble?" "It's much better, thank you. Some stiffness in the mornings, but the physical therapy is helping." Good, he replied, and I could almost picture him nodding distractedly, probably thinking about his next appointment or a pending financial analysis. We chatted about the weather, about Lily's dance recital that I'd missed due to distance, about James's science project. Then came the opening I hadn't realized I was waiting for. "So Mom, now that you've been retired a while, How are you finding the financial adjustment? Pension covering everything okay? My heart hammered against my ribs. This was at the moment of decision. I took a deep breath. Actually, Douglas, things have been tighter than I expected. I began, surprised at how naturally the lie flowed. The pension is only $1,000 a month, and with property taxes going up and all these medical bills from the fall. There was a brief silence on the line. Was he calculating numbers in his head? Preparing to offer assistance? Or merely processing this new information? 1,000? I thought teachers' pensions were better than that, he finally said, his tone unreadable. Well, I didn't qualify for the full amount because of some years I took off when you were young, I improvised, guilt already beginning to gnaw at me. The truth was my pension was a comfortable $3,000 monthly, and I had never taken more than standard maternity leave. I see, he said. And how are you managing the bills? The mortgage is paid off, right? Yes, thankfully your father insisted on that before he retired. But between property taxes, utilities, insurance, groceries, and especially medications, some months I have to decide what can wait. Another pause. I could hear him breathing, perhaps thinking, what about your prescriptions? Are you taking everything you're supposed to? The concern in his voice caught me off guard. Was this a sign that he cared more than I'd given him credit for? I take the important ones, I said, embellishing further. The heart medication and blood pressure pills. But the cholesterol one is expensive, so sometimes I skip it or cut the pills in half. Mom, you can't do that, he said sharply. Those medications are prescribed at specific dosages for a reason. I know, but choices have to be made, I continued, now fully committed to this fabrication. The roof needed repairs last month, and I had to use what I'd set aside for prescriptions. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Douglas asking surprisingly detailed questions about my expenses, my health insurance coverage, and my home maintenance issues. I provided answers that painted a picture of modest struggle, not destitution, but financial strain nonetheless. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? He finally asked. You have your own family to worry about, Douglas. Your own expenses. I didn't want to burden you. Mom, He began, then stopped. Let me think about this, okay? Maybe there are some options we haven't considered. We ended the call shortly afterward, with Douglas promising to call again soon. I sat at my kitchen table, the soup now cold in front of me, feeling a complex mixture of anticipation and shame. What had I done? What was he thinking now? Would this bring us closer together, or push us further apart? That night I barely slept. I imagined various scenarios unfolding, from Douglas offering token assistance to him seeing through my deception immediately. By morning, I had nearly convinced myself to call him back and confess, but something held me back. A need to know, perhaps. A desire to see who my son had truly become when faced with a parent in need. I went about my day with the heavy weight of deception on my shoulders. I watered my garden, chatted with a neighbor, and tried to act as though I hadn't potentially damaged my relationship with my only child. My phone remained silent all day, increasing my anxiety with each passing hour. Had I miscalculated? Had Douglas simply filed away my financial problems as not his concern? By evening, I was regretting the entire charade. I should never have listened to Mildred. I should have found other ways to reconnect with my son. As I prepared for bed, I resolved to call Douglas in the morning and tell him the truth, whatever the consequences might be. The first sign that something was happening came the very next morning. I was still in my robe, nursing my first cup of coffee, when my phone chimed with a text message from Douglas. Mom, can you send me your utility account numbers? Electric, gas, water. Also your property tax info. I stared at the message, confusion mixing with curiosity. This wasn't the response I had anticipated. No questions about why I hadn't mentioned financial problems before. No lecture about proper budgeting or retirement planning. Just a straightforward request for specific information. With hesitant fingers, I texted back. Why do you need those? His reply came quickly. Just looking into something. Trust me. Those last two words gave me pause. Trust. The very foundation I was currently undermining with my deception. With a sigh of resignation, I gathered the requested information and sent it to him, wondering what he was planning. 2 days passed with no further communication from Douglas. I tried to distract myself with my usual activities: a book club meeting, tending to my small vegetable garden, a lunch date with former colleagues, but my mind kept returning to the lie and its potential consequences. On the third day after our phone conversation, I received a call from Wilson's Pharmacy, where I'd been filling prescriptions for years. "Mrs. Thompson," said Lisa, the pharmacist I'd known since she was a teenager working part-time, "I wanted to let you know that all your prescriptions have been paid for the next 12 months. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, certain I had misheard. "Your son set up an account. All medications, including any new ones prescribed during the next year, will be automatically covered. He was very specific about making sure you don't skip doses or cut pills." I thanked her automatically, my mind reeling. Before I could fully process this development, there was a knock at my door. A delivery man stood on my porch with 4 large grocery bags. "Delivery for Eleanor Thompson," he announced cheerfully. "There must be a mistake." "I didn't order any groceries," I protested. "No mistake, ma'am. This is a standing weekly delivery, already paid for. Where would you like these?" In a daze, I directed him to my kitchen. As I unpacked the bags, I discovered they contained not just essentials but premium items I normally considered luxuries. Organic fruits, high-quality proteins, specialty coffees, and even some dark chocolate, my favorite indulgence that I rarely purchase for myself. Attached to one bag was a note in unfamiliar handwriting. "Meal planning service starts next week. Dietary preferences noted. Changes can be made online or by phone." I sat heavily in a kitchen chair, overwhelmed by these developments. What was Douglas doing? And why hadn't he called to discuss any of this with me? My questions multiplied the following day when a courier delivered a small envelope containing $500 in cash and a typed note that simply read, "Emergency fund. Replenished monthly." I had barely recovered from this shock when my neighbor Martha stopped by that afternoon. "I saw your son outside your house yesterday," she mentioned casually as we shared tea in my living room. "He was walking around the exterior with some man in a work uniform. They seemed to be examining the roof and gutters. Is everything okay?" I think so," I managed, wondering what other interventions Douglas was orchestrating without my knowledge. That evening I called Mildred, needing to confide in someone about the unexpected turn of events. "He's doing all this without even talking to me about it first," I explained after detailing the developments of the past few days. "Isn't that what you wanted?" Mildred asked. "Proof that he cares?" "Yes, but..." I struggled to articulate my discomfort. "It feels like he's taking over my life, rather than helping me maintain independence. Or maybe he's just being efficient," Mildred suggested. "He is a financial advisor after all. Problem solving is what he does." After our call, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset and contemplating my next move. The weight of my deception was growing heavier by the day. Douglas was clearly going to considerable lengths to address my fabricated financial struggles, while I continued to cash my actual $3,000 pension checks with a bitter taste of guilt in my mouth. I resolved to come clean when I next spoke with him. This charade had gone far enough, perhaps too far already. I would thank him for his generosity, explain my misguided reasoning, and accept whatever reaction came my way. My opportunity arrived sooner than expected. Douglas called the next morning to say he would be visiting on Saturday, 2 days away. This would be his first visit in nearly 6 months, and my stomach twisted with equal parts anticipation and dread. I spent the next 2 days in a flurry of preparation, cleaning the house that already received weekly visits from a service I'd maintained since Frank's death, baking Douglas's favorite oatmeal raisin cookies, and rehearsing various versions of my confession. Should I start with gratitude for his actions? Lead with an apology? Explain Mildred's influence? No approach seemed adequate for the situation I'd created. By Saturday morning, I had settled on a direct approach. I would thank him for his concern, explain my worry that we had grown distant, admit to my terrible lapse in judgment, and ask for forgiveness. I would offer to repay any expenses he had incurred, though I knew it would take me months or years to do so fully. As I arranged the freshly baked cookies on Frank's mother's china plate, I heard a car in the driveway. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my dress and prepared to face the consequences of my ill-conceived test. I opened the front door to find not just Douglas standing there, but Rebecca as well. This unexpected development momentarily threw off my carefully rehearsed confession. "Rebecca, what a lovely surprise," I said, genuinely pleased but confused by her presence. Douglas rarely brought his family on his brief visits. "Hi, Mom," Douglas said, giving me a quick hug that felt more perfunctory than affectionate. "We have some things to discuss with you." Something in his tone made my heart sink. Had he somehow discovered my deception already? They both looked serious, and I noticed Douglas was carrying a leather portfolio while Rebecca clutched a large tote bag. Come in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've just made fresh coffee, and there are cookies in the living room." They followed me inside, exchanging a glance I couldn't quite interpret. We settled in the living room, the cookies untouched as Douglas placed his portfolio on the coffee table. "I've taken the week off work," he announced without preamble. "The whole week?" I asked, surprised. Douglas guarded his vacation days jealously, typically using them for family trips to luxurious destinations. "We've been doing a lot of research and making arrangements," Rebecca added, her nurse's efficiency evident in her tone. "We wanted to present everything to you in person." My confession stuck in my throat as Douglas began opening folders and laying them on the coffee table in a neat row. I watched in silence, increasingly bewildered as the confrontation I had expected transformed into something else entirely. "First, let's talk about your monthly expenses," Douglas began, opening the first folder to reveal meticulously organized spreadsheets. "We've analyzed everything based on the information you provided and some research of our own." For the next 30 minutes, Douglas and Rebecca walked me through what could only be described as a comprehensive financial and lifestyle overhaul. They had created a detailed budget based on my $1,000 pension that incorporated the new services they had arranged. "All your utilities have been set up on automatic payment through this account we've established," Douglas explained, showing me documentation for a new bank account in my name. "We've funded it for the next 2 years, so you don't need to worry about those bills. The home repair service will handle all maintenance," Rebecca continued, "from changing light bulbs to major repairs. They specialize in helping seniors stay independent in their homes. One call, and they handle everything." They proceeded to detail the meal delivery service that would provide 3 fresh, nutritionally balanced meals daily, the prescription management system, the housekeeping service that would now come twice weekly instead of my current once-a-week arrangement, and a transportation service for days when I didn't feel comfortable driving. "And this is the most important part," Douglas said, opening the final folder. "We've set up a monthly stipend to supplement your pension. An additional $2,000 will be deposited directly into your checking account on the 1st of each month, starting next week." I gasped, unable to contain my shock. "Douglas, that's far too much. I can't accept that." "It's non-negotiable, Mom," he said firmly. "Rebecca and I have reviewed our finances, and this is completely sustainable for us. Your quality of life is not something we're willing to compromise on." The guilt that had been building for days now crashed over me in waves. I opened my mouth to confess, to stop this runaway train of generosity before it went any further, but the doorbell rang, interrupting me. "That must be the contractors," Douglas said, standing. "They're right on time." "Contractors?" I echoed weakly. "For the roof repairs and safety modifications," Rebecca explained, as Douglas went to answer the door. "Grab rails for the bathroom, non-slip flooring, improved lighting for the hallways. All the things that will make this house safer for you as you age." Douglas returned with 2 men in work uniforms, carrying clipboards and looking professionally eager. "Mrs. Thompson, we'll try to keep the disruption to a minimum," the older of the 2 assured me. "Your son has authorized a comprehensive package, so we'll be here for about 3 days. We can start with an assessment today if that works for you." I nodded numbly, watching as Douglas led them through the house, pointing out areas of concern with the authority of someone who had already thoroughly considered the space and its potential hazards. Rebecca stayed with me, showing me brochures for the various services they had arranged, explaining how each one would integrate seamlessly into my daily life. My carefully planned confession seemed increasingly impossible as the scope of Douglas's response to my supposed financial crisis became clear. He hadn't just thrown money at the problem. He had considered every aspect of my well-being and created systems to address each one. By the time the contractors left with promises to return Monday morning to begin work, I felt physically ill with guilt. Douglas and Rebecca insisted on taking me to dinner, and I found myself being escorted to an upscale restaurant in Douglas's luxury car, the weight of my deception making it difficult to engage in conversation. Throughout the meal, they continued to outline additional aspects of their planned monthly check-ins with a financial advisor friend of Douglas's who would help manage my limited resources. A new tablet with simplified technology for video calls with the grandchildren, a medical alert system disguised as stylish jewelry. "Why are you doing all this?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Douglas looked surprised by the question. "You're my mother," he said simply, as though that explained everything. "But it's so much." "Too much," I insisted. "Mom, I make more money in a month than most people see in a year," he said matter-of-factly. "What's the point of success if I can't make sure you're taken care of?" Rebecca reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Family supports family," she added. "That's what you taught Douglas, isn't it?" I nodded, tears threatening. The confrontation I had feared had not materialized. Instead, I faced something far more difficult to navigate: overwhelming generosity in response to a lie. The following evening, Douglas and Rebecca prepared dinner in my kitchen, moving with the easy familiarity of a long-established team. I sat at the small breakfast nook, watching them work and feeling increasingly trapped in the web of deceit I had spun. "The contractors will install the bathroom grab bars tomorrow," Douglas mentioned as he chopped vegetables with precise, even cuts. "They said the roof actually looks good, just needed some minor repairs to the flashing around the chimney. The meal delivery service left a detailed menu for you to review," Rebecca added, placing a colorful brochure in front of me. "You can make changes online or by phone. They're very accommodating about preferences." I nodded mutely, picking at the corner of the brochure without really seeing it. Every new arrangement, every thoughtful detail, was another brick in the wall of guilt that was steadily building around me. "We've also been thinking," Douglas continued, "about setting up a regular schedule for the grandkids to visit. Maybe one weekend a month. They barely know this house, and there's so much of your life they haven't experienced." "That would be lovely," I managed, the thought of more frequent visits from Lily and James momentarily cutting through my distress. "And we've contacted a local college about their senior auditing program," Rebecca said, stirring something aromatic on the stove. "You always said you wanted to study art history after retirement. Now you can take classes for free." It was too much. Every kindness, every consideration felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I had lied to my son, and instead of the dismissal I had half expected or the anger I might have deserved, he had responded with a level of care and attention I hadn't experienced from him in years. We sat down to dinner, a homemade lasagna that reminded me of family meals when Douglas was young. Rebecca poured wine, and Douglas raised his glass in a toast. "To making sure you have the retirement you deserve, Mom," he said warmly. "Dad would have wanted this." The mention of Frank was the final straw. My husband had been unfailingly honest, a man who believed that integrity was the foundation of all relationships. What would he think of what I had done? "I can't do this anymore," I blurted out, my voice cracking. "I have to tell you something." Douglas and Rebecca exchanged concerned glances. "What is it, Mom?" Douglas asked, putting down his wine glass. "Are you feeling unwell?" "I lied to you," I said, the words tumbling out before I could reconsider. "My pension isn't $1,000 a month. It's $3,000. I'm not struggling financially. I made it all up." The silence that followed was deafening. Douglas stared at me, his expression transitioning from confusion to disbelief. Rebecca's hand froze midway to her water glass. "You what?" Douglas finally asked, his voice unnaturally quiet. "I lied about my pension," I repeated, tears now flowing freely down my cheeks. "I'm so sorry. It was a terrible thing to do." "But why?" Rebecca asked, sounding genuinely bewildered. "Why would you do something like that?" I tried to explain the distance I had felt growing between us, my concerns about Douglas's values, Mildred's suggestion of a test. The words sounded hollow and childish as I spoke them, a pitiful justification for such a profound breach of trust. Douglas listened without interruption, his face becoming increasingly blank as I continued. When I finally ran out of words, he stood up abruptly. "I need some air," he said flatly, and walked out the front door without looking back. Rebecca and I sat in uncomfortable silence, my untouched lasagna growing cold on the plate before me. "He'll come back," she finally said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "He just needs time to process this." "I've ruined everything," I whispered, the full impact of my actions finally hitting me. Why did I listen to Mildred? Why did I think this was a good idea? "I don't know, Eleanor," Rebecca said, her nurse's compassion evident despite her obvious disapproval. "But Douglas loves you. That's something you never needed to test." I thought about all the times Douglas had shown his love in ways I had failed to recognize. The regular calls that I had dismissed as obligation. The offers to help with technology that I had interpreted as condescension. The invitations to visit that I had sometimes declined because I didn't want to impose. Had I been so focused on what our relationship lacked that I had become blind to what it actually contained? Outside, I could see Douglas pacing on the sidewalk, his cell phone pressed to his ear. Was he calling a hotel? Making arrangements to leave early? The thought of him walking away, perhaps for good, was unbearable. "I should never have doubted him," I said, more to myself than to Rebecca. I let insecurity cloud my judgment. "We all make mistakes," Rebecca offered, though her tone suggested this particular mistake was difficult to comprehend. "Not like this," I countered. "Not mistakes that hurt the people we love most." I thought of Frank then, of his unwavering belief in our son. "He's got a good heart, Ellie," he would say whenever Douglas made a childhood misstep. "He'll always find his way back to what matters." Had I lost faith in that essential truth about our son? The front door opened and Douglas stepped back inside. His face was composed, but his eyes were red-rimmed. I braced myself for anger, for disappointment, for the severing of our already fragile connection. Instead, he sat back down at the table and looked directly at me. "I need to understand," he said quietly. "Help me understand why you didn't just talk to me if you were feeling disconnected." It wasn't the reaction I had expected, and it opened a floodgate of emotion I had been holding back for years. "I didn't know how to reach you anymore," I admitted, my voice barely steady. "You've built this amazing life that seems so separate from mine. Every time we talk, I feel like I'm just getting the polite version of you, not my actual son." Douglas's expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across his features. "And I thought," I continued, forcing myself to maintain eye contact despite my shame, "that maybe you only saw me as an obligation. A check-the-box call once a month to ease your conscience. Is that really what you think of me?" he asked, genuine hurt evident in his voice. "That I only care about you out of some sense of duty?" "I didn't want to think that," I said. "But we've grown so far apart, and you seem so disinterested in my actual life. When I mentioned financial concerns in the past, you brushed them off." Douglas was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands folded on the table. When he finally looked up, I was surprised to see not anger but a reflection of my own vulnerability in his eyes. "I've been a terrible son, haven't I?" he said softly. "No," I protested immediately. "That's not what I'm saying at all." "But it's true," he insisted. "I've been so focused on building my career, on providing for Rebecca and the kids, that I've been taking you for granted." Rebecca reached over to squeeze his arm, a silent gesture of support. "The truth is," Douglas continued, "I've felt guilty for years about not doing more for you. Dad made me promise to take care of you, and I've told myself that as long as you seemed okay, I was fulfilling that promise. You have your own family, your own life," I said. "I never expected you to make me a priority." "But you should be a priority," he countered. "When you told me about your supposed financial problems, it actually gave me a sense of relief." "Relief?" I echoed, confused. Finally, something concrete I could fix. Something that would let me feel like I was being a good son. He shook his head ruefully. Pretty messed up, isn't it? I was almost happy you needed help. Rebecca cleared her throat gently. If I may, she said, looking between us. I lost my parents when I was in nursing school. Car accident. One day they were there, the next they were gone. I knew this about Rebecca, but she rarely spoke of her loss. I would give anything, she continued, for one more day with them. One more chance to ask for advice, or share a meal, or just sit in comfortable silence. Douglas still has that chance, but time is always running out. For all of us. Her words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the precious and finite nature of our relationships. I don't care about the money, Mom, Douglas said finally. I never did. What bothers me is that you felt you needed to trick me into showing that I care. I know, I whispered. It was wrong on every level. I don't know how to make it right. By talking to me, he said simply. By telling me when you feel disconnected or worried or lonely. By giving me the chance to be the son I want to be, not just the son who calls on schedule. And I'll do the same, I promised. No more tests, no more games. Just honesty, even when it's difficult. Douglas nodded, then surprised me by reaching for the folder containing the financial arrangements he had made. So, he said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike, given that your actual pension is 3 times what you told me, we should adjust these numbers. You're not canceling everything? I asked, startled. Why would I? You might not need the financial support I planned, but the services, the meal deliveries, the home maintenance, the safety modifications, those all make sense regardless of your pension amount. But the monthly stipend? I began. We'll repurpose that, he said thoughtfully. Maybe a travel fund so you can visit us more often. Or a foundation for your former school. We'll figure it out together. I stared at him, overwhelmed by his generosity of spirit. I don't deserve this, I said truthfully. It's not about deserving, Mom, Douglas replied. It's about family. And speaking of family, I think it's time we establish some new traditions. Like what? I asked. Weekly family dinners for starters, he said. We live less than an hour away. There's no reason we can't see each other every Sunday. I'd love that, I said, hope beginning to replace the despair I had felt moments earlier. And we could use your help with the kids' education, he continued. Lily is struggling with reading, and James needs guidance with his science projects. Who better than a retired teacher to help them? You want my help? I asked, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. Mom, you taught for 40 years. That expertise doesn't disappear in retirement. The kids would benefit enormously from your knowledge and patience. For the first time since my ill-conceived deception began, I felt a genuine smile form. I would love to help with the grandchildren's education. Then it's settled, Douglas said, reaching for his wine glass again. New beginnings based on truth this time. We clinked glasses, a silent acknowledgement of the understanding we had reached. The meal resumed, the tension gradually dissipating as we began to talk more openly than we had in years. Later that evening, after Rebecca had gone up to the guest room, Douglas and I sat on the porch swing, much as I had done with Frank on countless summer evenings. I am truly sorry, I said again, for doubting you, for the deception, for everything. I know, he said quietly. And I'm sorry too for giving you reason to doubt. We both have some rebuilding to do. He put his arm around my shoulders, an affectionate gesture he hadn't offered in years. Dad would have been really annoyed with both of us, he added with a small laugh. Oh, he would have read us the riot act, I agreed, smiling at the thought. Then he would have made us shake hands and move forward. So that's what we'll do, Douglas said. Move forward. Together. As we sat there watching the stars emerge in the evening sky, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since Frank's passing. The test had been foolish, the lie inexcusable, but somehow we had found our way to a truth more valuable than either of us had anticipated. 1 month after my ill-conceived test, my daily life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. The contractors had completed their work, making my home safer and more accessible without sacrificing its charm. The meal delivery service provided delicious, nutritious options that expanded my culinary horizons. But the most significant change wasn't in my surroundings or services, It was in my relationship with my son and his family. True to his word, Douglas established Sunday family dinners as a non-negotiable tradition. Each week they arrived promptly at 4. The children bursting through the door with stories and schoolwork and boundless energy that filled my quiet home with joyful chaos. "Grandma," Lily would call, rushing to show me her latest drawing or book. "Look what I made for you." James, more reserved but equally enthusiastic, would carefully extract science projects or math problems from his backpack, seeking my guidance and approval. "Is this the right approach, Grandma?" he would ask earnestly, his serious little face a miniature version of his father's. Douglas and Rebecca used these visits to include me in family decisions and discussions, from vacation planning to school choices. My opinion was sought and valued, not out of obligation but genuine respect. "Mom, what do you think about this summer camp for the kids?" Douglas would ask, showing me brochures across the dinner table. "You know their interests better than we do sometimes." Beyond the weekly dinners, Douglas began calling more frequently, not perfunctory check-ins but real conversations about his work challenges, his parenting questions, his thoughts about the future. I found myself offering the kind of motherly wisdom I had always hoped to share but had assumed he didn't want or need. "The client is being difficult," he confided during one such call. "Reminds me of that parent you used to deal with. What was her name? Mrs. Harrington? You always handled her with such patience." "Strategic patience," I corrected with a laugh. "And diplomatic honesty. Works with difficult clients just as well as with difficult parents." These moments of connection, of being truly seen and heard by my son, healed something in me that I hadn't fully realized was broken. The distance I had felt wasn't just his creation, it had been mine as well, built from assumptions and unspoken expectations. My relationship with Rebecca deepened too. She began stopping by on Wednesday afternoons, sometimes with a new tea she wanted to share, other times with questions about child development or family traditions she wanted to incorporate. "I never had this," she admitted during one of our tea sessions. "A mother-in-law, a grandmother figure for my children. I'm learning as I go." "So am I assured her. Being a mother-in-law and a grandmother didn't come with an instruction manual. "Well, you're doing it beautifully," she said, with the direct sincerity that was her hallmark. The grandchildren, perhaps the greatest beneficiaries of our reconciliation, flourished under the new arrangement. Lily's reading improved dramatically with our twice-weekly sessions, and James's science project on local bird migration patterns earned him top honors at the school fair. "Grandma helped me understand how to organize my research," he explained proudly to the judges, while I stood nearby, heart swelling with pride. Beyond my immediate family, I found myself reaching out to other retirees in my community with a new perspective. During a meeting of my book club, the conversation turned to adult children and the challenges of maintaining meaningful connections. "My daughter only calls on holidays," complained Margaret, a retired librarian. "And my son acts like visiting is a chore to be endured." In the past, I might have joined in with my own grievances. Instead, I shared what I had learned through my misguided test and its aftermath. "Have you tried telling them directly what you need from the relationship?" I asked gently. "They should just know," Margaret insisted. "But they don't," I countered. "Just as we don't always know what they need from us. The assumptions go both ways." My words sparked a thoughtful discussion about communication, expectations, and the courage required to be vulnerable with the people we love most. Several members left that meeting determined to initiate more honest conversations with their own families. Inspired by these discussions, I began volunteering at the senior center, helping other retirees navigate not just practical challenges like technology and healthcare paperwork, but the emotional landscape of aging in a youth-oriented culture. "Your value doesn't diminish with retirement," I would tell them, believing it more fully than I ever had. "But you may need to redefine it on your own terms." It was during one of these volunteer sessions that Douglas surprised me with a visit, arriving unannounced to take me to lunch. "I was in the area for a client meeting," he explained as we settled into a corner table at a local cafe. "Thought I'd see if my mother was free for an impromptu date." "Your mother is always free for you," I said, touched by the gesture. We chatted about his work, my volunteering, the children's latest achievements. Then, during a lull in the conversation, He looked at me with an expression of unusual seriousness. "You know, Mom, I never properly thanked you," he said. "For what?" I asked, puzzled. "For raising me with the values that helped me become who I am." He fidgeted with his napkin, clearly emotional. "When you told me about your supposed financial problems, it never occurred to me not to help. That was your doing your teaching." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "I didn't do it alone. Your father was incredible," Douglas finished. "But you were the daily presence, the consistent voice teaching me right from wrong, the importance of family, the value of education. Even when I was being a typical teenage jerk, those lessons were sinking in." "They certainly took their time surfacing," I teased gently, trying to lighten the moment. "True," he acknowledged with a smile. "But they were always there, like a foundation under everything else." That evening, reflecting on our lunch conversation, I realized how much I had learned from my terrible mistake. The test I had set for Douglas had ultimately tested me instead, revealing my own insecurities, my failure to communicate honestly, and my willingness to manipulate rather than simply ask for what I needed. But it had also created an opening for genuine healing and growth. By exposing the fault lines in our relationship, it had allowed us to rebuild something stronger and more authentic. The irony wasn't lost on me that my dishonesty had ultimately led to greater honesty between us. As I prepared for bed, I noticed a text message from Douglas. "Kids want to know if you'll help with their summer reading lists. Warning: Lily has requested daily FaceTime story sessions." I smiled as I typed my reply. Nothing would make me happier. My pension check arrived the next day, $3,000, exactly as it always had been. But its value in my life now seemed almost secondary to the richness of family connection I had rediscovered. The true wealth in my retirement wasn't measured in dollars but in Sunday dinners, Wednesday teas, homework help, and spontaneous lunch dates. I often wonder what other parents might learn from my experience. Would you ever test your children's love? Have you struggled with feeling disconnected from adult children who seem absorbed in their own busy lives? Perhaps the most important question is this: what honest conversation are you avoiding that might transform your most precious relationships? If my story has touched you in any way, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else navigating similar family dynamics. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about family relationships and the lessons we learn, sometimes the hard way, about what truly matters. Thank you for joining me on this journey of mistake, reconciliation, and renewed connection. Remember, it's never too late to rebuild what matters most.